Hello guys, this is Coach Jorge. Doing this simple video as a way to help you understand some of the new features on the TrainingPeaks log. This is something that some of you requested, just to better understand a little bit some of these features and most importantly some of the concepts and graphs that it's included. So one of the first things that you'll notice is the new thing, even it says here, is the homepage in which you have some information regarding your coming events. Since this is a new thing, I'll be adding your events here in coming weeks. Also, you have here some particular goals. So if we can add a particular goal about we're trying to improve your power or your running speed or whatever, we can add it here. This is also a new feature. So if needed, I'll be adding some of the specific stuff to your training. And then in this case for Yana, in this particular case, we can see some of the training she has today and tomorrow. And the newer thing, the one that is getting the most questions, is regarding this portion in terms of these graphs about your fitness, your fatigue, and your form. So what does this mean? Where is this coming from? And how does the program, the software, interprets the data that we provide in order to deliver these results? Well, in order to explain you that, let me explain you something related to what's called the performance management chart. So on the dashboard, it's a page that you can do a bunch of analysis based on the data that you feed into your training, and you can break it down by sport, you can break it down by distance, by miles, by hours of training, or by some of the devices that you use for your training that might be related to power meter, heart rate, etc. So to understand that, I'm gonna use the performance management chart, which basically use those three concepts discussed on the homepage: the fitness, the fatigue, and the form. So fitness relates to this blue line, also known as chronic training load, and it's basically a relationship in terms of all the training that you're doing, the different weeks leading up to your event, and how your fitness is improving over time. And how is that determined? It's based on your threshold or your training zones. So if we go back to your homepage, here you have your training zones. These zones, for now, don't pay as much attention in terms of the zones itself, just because the way that the software determine these zones is slightly different of the way I do it on your season planner. So the zones may not necessarily match directly of what you have on your season planner. So for your zones, relate to that. But where it does matches is when we talk about thresholds. And threshold is just a way that we are able to determine a point in fitness and a point in time during your training based on various concepts. And that threshold just tell us what's kind of like your ability to do a particular work over a particular period of time. So the way that we define thresholds at E3 is just we take some efforts, whether they're short efforts or they are time trials, and then based on that we extrapolate what you should be able to accomplish for a particular given time. In this case is 1 hour. So all your thresholds are based on what you should be able to do given your current fitness for an hour maximal effort. So if we were to see in terms of your zones, if you go to your name and hit on your zones, by the way, this might be slightly different on the way that you see it because you have an athlete account and I have the coach account. But if you go here and if we see, for instance, the heart rate threshold for Yana in this particular case for cycling, this is, if she was to do a 1 hour all-out effort, this is the average heart rate she should be able to accomplish. This is an estimate from shorter tests, so this figure might change slightly, but not too much. If we look at power, it's the same thing. The threshold, this is what she should be able to do on an all-out effort for around an hour, and then based on that, we can determine different training zones. When she's training at her threshold, in this particular case, this is roughly the power she should be able to holding, plus minus. But if she's doing harder efforts like VO2, she should be able to go a little bit harder. If she's doing easier efforts, quote unquote, if she's doing a tempo or endurance pace type of intensity, is going to be lower. And we do the same for swimming and for biking. So all of those are based on thresholds. So why is that important? Because the software, if we go back to the dashboard and we go back to the performance management chart, in this particular case, basically what it does is if you do an activity and we already define a threshold, so let's say for running, the threshold for, in this particular case, for Yana, her threshold for run, that's heart rate, speed. For running, her threshold is 6:15. So if she were to do something like between a 10K to a 15K, between 40 minutes to an hour, she should be able to sustain roughly that pace. Okay, so if we go and look at an activity and a particular run, let's say this run, we can go to the analyze, and in here you're gonna get a summary of all your workout. So in this particular case, for Yana, if you see at something like the pace or for the activity, it says that her average pace for the activity was 7:25s, and because of that, her running training stress score, also known as TSS, was 76 points. So how does this relate to threshold? Well, if you were to do 1 hour at your threshold, which in this case for her is around 6:15, that would equal 100 points. That's how the software gives a value to the activity that you're doing. So 1 hour at threshold equal 100 points, whatever that threshold is, biking, swimming, running. Okay, so in this case, her intensity factor is that she run 7:25s. That for her means that she run around 83% of her threshold for 1 hour. So if she would run 1 hour at her threshold or 100%, then this TSS would equal to 100 points. But because she run 7:25s, which is 83% for 1 hour, then her threshold was, her training stress score is only 76 points. So each activity, if you look at your different runs, you look back and you do look at your runs, you can look at this one was a 32-minute run. She was running 7:45s, which is only 83% of her threshold. So that means that for that activity, she logged 39.9 points. All activities, whether cycling, swimming, and running, is going to give you a stress score. The more data that you log, that's why very important for you guys to upload your data, upload your training files, your full files for biking and training, if you're training with a power meter or a heart rate monitor, if you're running and swimming by GPS, using a GPS, the pace actually that you accomplish for an activity, or when you're using heart rate monitor. First, we need to know that your thresholds are properly defined here on your zones. And if that's the case, all the data that you accumulate is going to give us points. So for all activities, for instance, in this week, Yana accumulated 983 points. Okay, so how that relates to the homepage related to your fitness, your fatigue, and your form? Well, the software, what it does is that all those points that you're accumulating every day and every week in terms of your training stress score, it gives you points. So this week she has accumulated 538. Last week she accumulated 983, and so forth. So all those points get added, and then it's divided by 42 days. Why is that divided by 42 days? Because it takes roughly 6 weeks for adaptations to fully take place when you're training. So if you do an activity today, let's say you go and run an hour, to realize the full benefits of that workout is going to take off to 6 weeks to hit the full benefits. Okay, so in this case, all the points that she has accumulated over different weeks get divided by 42 days and gives you these CTL, or chronic training load, what on your homepage is defined as fitness. So if you see here, in this particular case, if we go to this year, this is for the past 2 years. If we go to this year, the most recently, her CTL for swimming, biking, and running was 145.6 points. That means that all the points that she has accumulated are divided by 42 days or 6 weeks, and that gives you that number. So obviously, the less points that you accumulated, the lower this would be, and vice versa. The more points you log every week, the higher the points. So that's how that gets calculated. All the points that you accumulated off to a point in time in your training divided by 42 days. Okay, and that gives you your fitness or your CTL. The higher this number, the higher your fitness in theory. because this is only as good as the numbers that you feed it. So if your threshold numbers are accurate, if you log all your data, it's going to give you a better representation of where your fitness. But also this is a mathematical model that it only understands ones and zeros. So if you, this assumes that we work like a machine, and if we do a lot of training, we get fit. If we stop training, we lose fitness. And that's not necessarily how it happens. We achieve fitness over time, over different years of training. And when we stop training, the fitness doesn't disappear as fast as this model assumes. But anyway, so blue equal fitness. So you can see how after her break from Kona last year, she started training again this year, and she has accumulated all these points. Now, the pink line, which is fatigue related to what they call acute training load, this is how much fatigue your body's carrying in a point in time after all the training that you've done. And that's short term, because if you do a very hard bike ride today, you're going to get some fitness, but I was mentioned it's going to take up to 6 weeks to fully benefit from that session. But after that session, you're proportionally more fatigued. So if I would ask you to do another hard session the next day, probably your performance wouldn't be as good, just because you're carrying that short-term fatigue. So in this particular case, she might have done a workout that it accumulated a lot of fitness, but you can also see accumulated a lot of fatigue, 200 points. How's that calculated? Well, you take all the points, same that you accumulated, all the training stress score points that you have accumulated over time, and it's divided that by 7 days. Why? Because fatigue, you accumulate it faster, but you also shed it faster. So if you do a workout today, if you take, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, it's going to take you that time roughly to start recovering or fully recover from that session. Some people recover faster than others, depending on age, gender, fitness level, etc., different things. But if you do a session, you're going to be proportionally more fatigued after the session, but in a day or two, you're going to be recovering, you're going to be able to perform better. So here on 4/8/2016, she had a lot of fatigue, and then a week roughly later, that fatigue dropped almost, 50, 60 points, 100 points. As you can see, short-term fatigue increases very rapidly, but decreases very rapidly as well. And the difference between this blue line and this pink line is what's called form, which is when you are primed to perform better, when you're primed to have a peak performance. So if we use this graph for last year for Yana's training, leading up to Kona, her biggest fitness, or the biggest amount of points that she accumulated over that time divided by 6 weeks, was roughly 141 points, almost 142 points. And the biggest amount of short-term fatigue that she accumulated was 208 points. But as she started getting close to Kona, she started tapering, as you can see here. So the model automatically assumes that you're losing fitness right away, which that doesn't work that way, but that's how the mathematical model works. But as we were getting to before Kona, the day before, which was here, you can see how her training stress balance, of what your homepage called form, was on a positive balance. So fitness minus fatigue equal form. So this training stress balance, the yellow line, when it's on the positive, it means that you're primed for a good performance. When it's on the negative, as you can see right here, minus 69.5 points, it means that on the short term, you're not going to be very good at performing very well, because you're proportionally short term more fatigued. You can see here 204 points. Here you are, or the same one, 69 points here. It's roughly around 190 points here. So it works on an opposite. The higher the pink line, the lower the yellow line, and vice versa. As you start recovering here, quote unquote, your fitness starts dropping. It doesn't drop that fast. The fatigue drops very fast, and your ability to be able to perform better, it's higher. So here, over time, you can see how your fitness is improving. In the short term, you can see how fatigued you are, and you can relate it to how you actually feel, because this also ignores all other factors that affect the way that you feel. We don't only train and then we feel good or we feel bad, depending whether you were rested or not. Stress affects a lot of the way that we feel, and this is an intangible way that we cannot assess directly, because we don't know how much stress at work taxes our body. We don't know how much stress with the family or with relationships stresses our body. We don't know how much that couple of bad nights of sleep because you're stressed affects your training. All those things are intangible, so we can only go by how we feel. So if you look at this graph and you see, it's like, well, I see that right now I have accumulated, if we were here for instance, I accumulated a lot of fitness, but I'm also very fatigued. So if I was going to try to perform, my performance wouldn't be very good because it's minus 49.6. And then you relate it to how you feel. It's like, yeah, well, work's been very busy this week. I haven't slept a lot. On top of that, stress with family, kids, whatever. So I feel even more tired of what this is telling me. So you always have to put it into context, and then can says, you know what, maybe it will be a good idea that I start taking it easy. I'm gonna put on my on my logs, tell Jorge that I have a workout, I didn't feel very good, I'm feeling a little bit tired, and then maybe I'll just add information like, you know what, it's been a stressful week at work. Maybe that's why. On the other hand, you might be here, it's like, oh, I should be feeling very tired, but you know what, I feel good. Like, I can feel some of the fatigue and soreness on the muscles when I'm doing a workout, but I can handle it. You know what? I'm gonna put that on my blogs, on my logs. I'm gonna tell Jorge, he's like, you know what? I did this workout and it was challenging, but you know what? I'm feeling good. Maybe we can do more. All those things is very good information that it's useful for me. So if you go back to your home page, here it gives you just a summary of what we were looking on that performance management chart. It tells you that today, for Yana, she has 140.7 CTL points, fitness, which is all the training stress core points accumulated divided by 42 days, okay? Fatigue is 133.1 points, which is all the training stress scores accumulated up to date divided by 7. And then form, it's the difference. Not the difference between these two, but the difference of how much training you have done over time, and that's divided over a specific algorithm that the software has, and it's how it comes up with this number. But what is important is to say, is like, well, this is what I've done recently. So why is my fitness higher than my fatigue right now? It's like, oh, well, if I was going to look at my calendar, and you probably already know this for yourself as an athlete, it's like, well, last week I did a bunch of training. I did accumulated 14 hours of training, this many points. And this week, it's been an easy week. I did recovery here. I did recovery here. So I've been doing less training, up to like 9 hours right now, half of the points that I did last week. So over these past 4 or 5 days, I've been able to recover. So that's why I'm maintaining very good fitness while my fatigue is going down, to the point that now my form, it's in positive range. So if I was gonna be at a point that I was gonna do a race right now, probably I will be still a little fatigued, but I would be on a good position to start thinking of having a good performance. If you were preparing for a race, you would be tapering. So this fatigue will continue to go down as you get closer to the race, which usually are on a Sunday. So you still have at least a couple of days of recovery. So then this form will jump higher. Then the fitness RAM rates, here it tells you how all this relates to the past 7 days, 28 days, 90 days, and 365 days. So over the last 7 days, in theory, quote unquote, her fitness has decreased by almost 5 points, 4.9, because we just already established that the last 5 days are being recovery days. So she hasn't accumulated as much fitness just because she's been recovering. Again, this is a mathematical model, so we don't lose fitness this fast, but it just gives you an idea. It's like, oh yeah, it makes sense. It's dropping because I've been recovering. Now, over the last 28 days, it seemed that her fitness has stayed pretty constant. It hasn't increased as much, but it hasn't dropped that much. And then when you look back and look at the calendar, you can get a better idea why is that. It's like, well, actually I've done a lot of training. Like this I did 14 hours and did almost 15 hours with 900 points. The previous week was 14 hours with 100 points. But the previous one, I was in Arizona, and it was like 27 hours, almost 28, and I did 1,500 points. And the previous week, whatever. So She has had some big weeks, but also she has had to recover from those weeks. So that's why it seems that on paper, her fitness hasn't improved as much. Again, this is a mathematical model, so it doesn't work as in that regard as black and white. We know she's probably the fittest she's been this early in the year, but at least this gives us an idea of where she is. And then the last 90 days, it tells us that over 90 days, her fitness has improved a lot, 40 points. It's a big number. And we can also see it here over the past 365 days. So we compare it to where she was a year before. She's 51 points ahead of where she was this point in time last year. So that's significant just because her fitness is way ahead of where she was last year. This is in part because she's having an early year event with Texas, and also because the training we've been doing is very specific. But this is a great thing for you to have. You can see it on your smartphone also. You open it up, it will tell you what you're doing that day, and you can see your fitness, your fatigue, and your form. So this is great for you and for me because I can look at it and then put into context what's happening. If I'm looking at this, and I would look a very high number for fatigue, and then I'm looking at your log comments, and it's like, oh, I'm feeling very tired and whatnot. It's like, oh, it makes sense. We've been pushing this athlete very hard, and in the context of what we're looking at, it makes sense that he or she is fatigued and we need to recover a little bit. If on the other hand, we would see that this number was lower and the athlete is struggling, then it will give me a red flag right away to start looking into other areas, not necessarily related to training, because stress is the training killer. Stress is the silent way that it will keep you away from training if we don't pay attention to it. We don't pay attention to stress often. We don't know how much stress is affecting us, but it affects training a lot. So when I see that, then I'll be inquiring to see like how's work, how's life, are you been resting? And all those different things will tell us a better story. But for you, you can use this homepage to look at these things. It will give you a perfect picture of where you are on your training. You can see how much points you have accumulating over a week in relationship to how much training you're doing for swimming, biking, running, or other. You can look at particular workouts, and you can see a summary right here of how much points this session costs you. You can go to analysis and get a better idea of how this is relating to your training. And if you see a number that seems funky, let me know, because sometimes we might have uploaded the file and the file was not properly saved. Sometimes happen with all the devices, and it gives us weird numbers. So I'm keeping an eye on these things, but as with everything, sometimes some things might fall off the cracks. So if you notice something, let me know. And then on another video, I'll talk more about the dashboard and things, all these different graphs that you can use to analyze your training. I use it a lot to track your training. You can see here I have a performance management chart just for this year. I have this one for the past 2 years, and then there's a lot of different information that I use to monitor your training, and also to decide when we need to do more training, when we need to do less training, when we need to taper, and so forth. I also have performance management charts just for the run, just for the bike, and these ones I can adjust them from my end, but you can always go here and then you can add any other chart that you might want. And if you click the 3 lines right here, you can adjust it by dates, by sport, and whatever. So check this out. Use this homepage to get a better sense of how your training is coming along. And really, please, please, please keep updating your logs. Keep updating as much data as you can, logging all those files, because it really helps me a lot. And when you have questions, when you see some of this that it's not making sense or it's not matching the way that you feel, it's also an opportunity for us to figure it out and get ahead so we can adjust and always try to give you the proper training. So check it out, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.